Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the new self-titled record from Injury Reserve. This is one of my most anticipated records of the year, given that I quite liked a lot of the singles coming into this project. And after listening to this thing, I will say that this project definitely lived up to the hype, at least for me personally. Right now, this is one of my favorite albums of the year so far. Definitely a great hip-hop release of 2019. Overall, I quite like what Injury Reserve did for themselves here on this project. In terms of the overall sound of this album, the group seems to be going for a more experimental sound. They take a lot of influence from a lot of the different types of experimental hip-hop that have been popular in the past decade or so. I wouldn't quite say that they're inventing a new sound with it for themselves or anything quite like that. This album isn't necessarily groundbreaking or anything, I would say. However, the way that they're performing a lot of these different sounds that have existed already, and the way that they're pulling a lot of them together on this project and incorporating them into their core sound, makes for a really solid project overall, as they just excel at performing all these different sounds across the board on this project. And there are some moments on this thing where they do venture out into some different sounds and ideas that maybe haven't been done before, or at least not super frequently, and the results that they get from these experimentations are really great overall, to say the least. For the most part, the start of this album opens up with some of the more hard-hitting cuts on this project. The first track on this thing, Corona and Lime, which was one of the singles from this project, like I said in my track review for it, I think it was a great track, and I still think it's a great song here. And I think it's a good opener to this project as well, given that it's probably one of the more simple cuts on this thing. It has a really nice driving beat to it. The verses on this thing are really solid as well, really witty, really creative, and nothing about the track I would say is all too out there or crazy or anything quite like that. As I said, it's pretty straightforward, it's pretty to the point, it doesn't overstay its welcome, but overall it's a really nice start and introduction to what this album is going to deliver to you. The second track on this album, Jawbreaker, is a song that when I initially heard it as a single, I wasn't super crazy about it or anything. However, I did think to myself that it might sound better in the context of the album as a whole, and I'm happy to say that that is certainly the case here on this project, as the more I listen to this album, the more Jawbreaker really grows on me, and the more some of the aspects of this track that didn't really click with me as a single click with me more in the context of this thing as a larger listening experience. The spoken word passage on this track, well, I thought it was kind of awkward just for one song, and especially a lead-off single. It fits this track just in the album a lot better, in my opinion. I think the lyrics to it, I guess if you can call them lyrics, given that they're spoken word, are pretty creative and interesting as well. And that doesn't just apply to the spoken word section of this track. Even on the actual rapped verses, the lyrics on this track are really great, talking about fashion, a lot of the negative things to come as a result of that. Overall, it's really interesting. I think the actual verses on this track are really solid as well, whether they be from Injury Reserve or Rico Nasty, who's featured on this track. She has a great verse on this thing that I think is one of the best on the entire album. The hook on this track, provided by Proteins, is great as well. It's really catchy, really earwormy, in a way that I don't think I really realized when I first reviewed the track by itself. However, the more I listen to it, the more the hook to this track just gets stuck in my head really easily. The instrumental to this track is also really quirky and fun. Overall, yeah, this track is definitely a really solid addition to the album overall, and one that I'm happy to say has grown on me a lot since I first heard it. The next track, GTFU, is another one of the most hard-hitting cuts on this entire project. It starts off with some vocals provided by JPEG Mafia, who I am just a little bit disappointed by the fact that he doesn't really have a full verse on this track. He kind of does the intro and outro to it, which is still pretty cool. I like the aggression he brings to this track, considering that's one of the things he does best in his own music. I'm just maybe the slightest bit disappointed that he doesn't get a full verse here, because I think that would have been awesome. But, you know, even without him having a full verse on this thing, this track is really awesome. Cakes the Killer provides a really aggressive, nasty-sounding verse right at the start of this track, another great feature to this project. And the guys in Injury Reserve certainly bring the heat on this track as well, if you will. And the instrumental to this song is another one that's really interesting on this project. Lots of times it's very aggressive. However, at a certain point in the track, it has a bit of a beat switch up, which I found to be really interesting, just because it goes from this more aggressive, almost industrial-like sound to something that sounds a bit more beautiful and more clean sounding overall. It was just a really nice beat switch up, in my opinion, and not something I was expecting from the track after the first few, seconds of listening to it. The track Jailbreak the Tesla, which was another single released from this thing pretty early on, is another cut on this thing that I do enjoy a lot. I think the beat on this song is really quirky, interesting and fun. I think the verses on this track have a lot of energy to them as well, and I think Aminé's feature on this song is also pretty great too. Just another really good, hard-hitting track on this thing. The song Rap Song Tutorial was one that, on my initial listens of the album, I thought wasn't going to be one of my favorites overall, considering that the structure and idea behind the song is one that I thought might be a bit gimmicky after several listens. Essentially, as this track progresses, they're making a rap song, if you will, as you can probably assume by the title of this track, starting off with just the drums, eventually adding in the hook, and by the end of the song you have everything put together. I thought that this structure might be, not that interesting to listen to for many listens. However, I was wrong with that, because this song still hits really hard despite its kind of odd structure. Primarily because each segment of this track still is really hard hitting, despite the fact that it's going for this overall concept of, putting together a rap song for you as you're actually listening to it. I like the fact that the spoken word parts provided by this computer program don't really last long enough to get to be annoying on this track. I like the fact that even some of the earlier parts on this track where it's just the drums or just them recording the chorus to this track a cappella still sound really great. And when this whole thing gets put together later on, it is one of the most hard-hitting tracks on the album. The beat on this track is amazing, it slaps, it's great. The hook on this track is really catchy. The verses are really fierce as well. It's, even if it didn't have the whole rap song tutorial concept tied to it, and this was just a normal song on the album, it'd still be a really great track overall. And that's why I feel like this song still manages to stand out despite the kind of gimmicky idea attached to it. I feel like if the song tied to this track wasn't as strong, it might be just a fun track to listen to maybe once or twice. However, the quality of the songwriting here really makes this song a standout and a track that I could repeatedly listen to despite its really odd structure. The track Wax On is another one of the highlights on the album. I really love the verses on this track that once again really bring some heat, especially from Freddie Gibbs on the track, who has a really great verse on this thing too. He has some great chemistry with the Injury Reserve guys, and he just adds a whole lot of extra character and personality to this track overall. But it was really the beat on this track that I think stole the show overall. I like the fact that it still has some aggressive elements to it. However, you also have some of those more beautiful elements being incorporated as well, especially some of the strings that are incorporated into the track here. It makes the entire beat of this song sound very triumphant, despite its overall kind of aggressive and dark tone. It's definitely one of the more interesting beats that I've heard this year and from this album, but I think it's one of the highlights on this thing. You do have some tracks later on in the track listing that begin to have some more introspective lyrics that change things up a bit more, and I do think that some of these tracks are some of the best on the entire record. For example, the track What a Year It's Been has one of the most interesting beats on it, and not just that, but it also has some pretty great lyrics tied to it as well. The group gets pretty introspective here on this track, and I like how towards the start of the song, the beat is pretty minimalistic overall. It allows for the lyrics that are being rapped here at the start to be pretty much what you're only focusing on. However, a good way into this track, the beat just kind of goes crazy, I guess you could say. There's so much going on. It's like this really quiet, simple beat just erupts into something completely different, and it sounds amazing overall. You have these really pounding, aggressive drums. You have these crazy synth sounds going everywhere. You have these auto-tuned vocals lingering in the background as well that sound really great. It's this really cool breakdown that is one of the best moments on this entire project. And despite the fact that the instrumental from this point on in the track is a bit more developed than it is prior to this odd breakdown, it still allows for the vocals here, the lyrics primarily, to be in the spotlight overall. And this track is one of the best on the album in my opinion, as it really embodies a lot of the strengths of this project overall, whether it be the really experimental, out there, quirky and interesting production, or the really great bars and deliveries. Overall, this track has all of it, really. The track Best Spot in the House is another one of the album's highlights from a lyrical standpoint, not just because it sees the band tackling some more introspective themes, but also because the introspective themes are among the album's most interesting overall. I like in the first verse of this track where Richie is talking about feeling bad for using his own music to talk about the death of a friend, despite the fact that he didn't go to this friend's funeral. I like how he uses this story to essentially talk about how artists out there may use their music to talk about things in their own personal lives and people that they know, kind of at the expense of being able to make money and make the music that they want to make. And he also brings up on this track how, despite the fact that this is kind of a negative thing, it's a lot of times these subject matters that are in songs that most relate to fans and that fans really want to hear. It's a really interesting dynamic, and it's one that I don't often see brought up in a ton of songs or anything like that, so I'm just pretty happy to see it here. And then in the second verse of this track, you see Groggs talking about, I believe, a friend who, when he falls into a coma, he says that when he's out of the coma, if he ever does, he's going to stay in contact with him every day. However, of course, when this ends up happening, that doesn't end up being the case, as at times it seems like it takes him like a week to answer back to this friend. And it's just a really interesting dynamic to see, as I believe a lot of people out there could relate to something like this. How, there's some people out there who we care about and we wish we could stay in contact with more. However, when we try to, it oftentimes doesn't end up being as consistent as we would like. And at times, when these people are in trouble or when they're hurt, that's when we want to be with them most. However, when they're just perfectly fine or anything like that, they tend to float to the back of our minds and we don't really tend to think of them all that much. It's a kind of sad reality that's brought up here on this track, and it's another one of these standout lyrical moments on this project overall. I do want to also say that the chorus on this track, while not as lyrically deep as either of the verses that are here, is still pretty catchy overall, and it's just another great component to this track. So yeah, overall, best spot in the house is one of the best tracks on this album. The track New Hawaii on this album is another one of the more interesting cuts on this thing, as it sees the group really chilling out their sound a bit more. The beat on this track is a bit more laid back, as are the deliveries on this thing. I do really like the vocoded vocals that pop up on this thing as well. They're definitely some of the most interesting vocals on this entire project, and that's why they really stand out to me. Overall, just another really solid example of Injury Reserve stepping out of their comfort zone here on this track to great success. The track Three Man Weave that closes out this album is another one of my favorites overall, just because I feel like it does such a great job of concluding this project. With its very triumphant, jazzy instrumental, this thing definitely feels like the group is kind of saying that, yeah, throughout this entire album we've been telling you who we are, we're telling you that we're here to stay, and this is our mission statement, and this track is just the end to that pretty much. I think it serves its purpose really nicely. I think the verses on this thing are really playful and really fun. Like I said, the instrumental is one of the other best on the entire project. And overall, it really embodies a lot of what I think works on this album. The great chemistry, the great flows, the great instrumentals, the great lyrics. It's all here on this song. There are a couple of shorter cuts that pop up on this project as well, like the QWERTY interlude or the track Hello. I don't think that these tracks are necessarily bad overall. However, I do wish that maybe there was a bit more substance to them, particularly the track Hello, considering it's not an interlude. However, overall, it's not a really big complaint I have with this project. They don't detract from the album overall. And I do want to say that it is really my only complaint with this project overall, is pretty much everything else here is great, in my opinion. I think the instrumentals on this thing pull from a lot of other experimental underground hip-hop that's been popular in recent years, but I just love the fact that the group is able to take it and make it their own on this thing. I think a lot of the bars and verses on this thing are fantastic as well, whether they be really braggadocious or they're a bit more introspective and tackling some really interesting subject matter like I explained before. The bars and verses on this project are always great. The chemistry on this project is fantastic as well, whether it's between the guys in Injury Reserve or their features on this project, which I already explained a lot of them before, but they're all really great. They all provide something new to this project. They're all doing a really great job here. So, yeah, I don't really have any major complaints with this project. If you're an Injury Reserve fan, if you're a fan of more alternative, experimental, underground hip-hop, this should definitely be an album that you check out, because like I said earlier, right now, this is one of my favorite albums of the year so far, and definitely one that I'm going to be listening to a lot for a good while to come, to say the least. So, yeah, that's really all I have to say about this project. It is just my own personal opinion, everything I've said here, so if you happen to disagree with it to any extent, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own thoughts on this album in the comments section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, things like album reviews, track reviews. If you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.